podcast. I'm John Mark, and this is Wayne Weaver, and we've just come from a busy day, meetings and work and all kinds of things. And so glad to be with you tonight. We want to continue our theme from last week. And if you're just joining us, last week we talked about our response to abusive authority. So we're just titling this tonight, Our Response to Abusive Authority, Part 2. I don't know that we're going to talk so much about abusive authority as just authority in general, but I want to start by reading the question that got us started last time. Before I do, though, I just want to remind you to, if you like this content, to please hit the like button and subscribe to be notified when we go live, like we are tonight. And also, be sure to send in your comments to library@oasistabernacle.org, and we'd love to hear from you. This was actually a topic that was sent into us, and this is a question. How can someone be led to understand the importance of respecting authority from God's perspective, especially after being let down by authority and repeatedly having been under authority who did not have my best interest in mind? And so we talked last time, Wayne. We had quite a, we actually got more fired up toward the end than we did at the beginning. But you were talking about just the idea that part of the issue here is that authority doesn't necessarily just have the best interest of the subject, but really we're talking about, of the person, but we're talking about authority looks at, especially in a church, we're looking at what's best for the group. We're looking at what's best in the kingdom of God, not necessarily even just the individual's perspective. And maybe that's part of what was the problem here, is this person was grappling with the feeling that they were left out of they were maybe doing what was best for the authority and not for them, is kind of how they felt. I don't know. We were talking about that a little bit. We didn't get into too many particulars, because the other thing that we looked at is this happening in a church? Because the context wasn't necessarily given. So was it happening in a church or was it happening in a home? Is it a husband and wife? Is it a child and a parent? But authority is one of those things that we will encounter at some level in all of our dealing with people. May not have authority in the home that's very strong, but there'll be authority in the community. Drive a car, you're going to meet up with an authority on the highway at some point. You drive a truck, you're going to meet up with a DOT sometime telling you you're overweight or wanting to tell you that. A lot of things like that. We run into authority, or we encounter authority. Jesus, when he was on earth, had authority, was under authority, operated in authority, exercised authority, and it was obvious. And in Matthew 7:29, we read that this statement, he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. And somehow, even though the scribes and the Pharisees had authority or operated in positions of authority, the people that listened to them realized that there's something different about Jesus. There was an authority by which he spoke. Now, you've been around men in various positions, but you've also been around men of character. Leonard Ravenhill, would you say he was a man of authority?
Most definitely.
When he spoke, you knew there was an authority behind it. Same with Derek Prince, David Wilkerson.
Very much so, yeah.
What was the quality when you looked at that? Because we're talking about people in authority and under authority, but what is it that gives that quality of authority?
What is the quality? Well, the quality is they had a relationship with the person they were authority under. All right. And of course, that's Jesus. So, but that's what changes the quality. If like Jesus, the quality of his authority came from the Father. and the Father gave it to him because he was under it. The Father will not give authority if you're not under, if you're not in submission to that. Satan was one of those examples. He was not in submission to the Father, and therefore he was thrown out of heaven. So now he stands on his own something, authority by way of dictator. But then what rules from there down is basically rebellion. And so the authority figure in the line of, when we speak about the devil himself, that has come as a result of rebellion. And you'll find that character, it's not a quality of character, but it is the same depiction all the way down. You'll find rebellion every time, because his key authority that he would have possessed by himself was rebellion. That's the character, that's the picture that we see. He was rebellious against God. So his lineage will be rebellious. So can you imagine a kingdom of rebels? That's who Satan's kingdom is.
Wow. And when he encountered Jesus in the wilderness and he tried to entice Jesus to bow down and worship, he made the statement that he basically has authority over all the kingdoms of the world, and he can give them to whoever he wants.
He said, it was delivered to him. So, and it was. So he could give, but what did Satan ask him to do? To bow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what does that show? Submission. Yeah. And so then he could have done that. And Jesus very quickly answered and said, no, this is not, you can't, you're not supposed to tempt the Lord, your God. And notice that, tempting the Lord, I think it says the Lord your God, right? The Lord.
Well, I think he quotes it and says,
man shall not live by bread alone one time, but he responded 3 different ways, and it's interesting.
And I think in this one he said, you shall worship the Lord your God.
And him only shall you worship, So that's a sense of worship in bowing and being under authority is a sense of worship.
It was coming under, yes.
Yeah.
And that concept of authority, I think, often gets misunderstood with people in positions of authority. And whoever wrote in this question and asked about dealing with respect for authority was obvious. It seems like, as you read the question, you might have been dealing with someone who doesn't understand the concept of coming under the authority of God, coming under the character influences of God. I think many times people in positions of authority, like the Pharisees, made a lot of rules. Jesus said, you load people down with burdens that are so hard to carry, but you don't lift a finger to help them.
And you can't even do it yourself.
Right. And I think that many times people who are in these positions of authority are making rules and regulations and wanting people to do things that they maybe aren't willing to do themselves. Jesus never asks us to do things that he himself.
Right.
And I think that's a fair statement.
Yeah,
if you look at that, he never asked us to do things that he himself wouldn't do or be willing to do.
Why would he? Because authority doesn't work that way.
Right.
What you are submitted to is what follows you in the same thing. So the demand is not greater on you or on him or on her than what is on you. And that's an example of that. You will always, and like you said, you mentioned the word quality of authority. If you look at Jesus, okay, so the authority that he had was the submission that he got because the Father was over him. And that's simply what that is. So, but then, let's. How should I state this? This is a little hard. How do I get my point across? Authority. When we worship, we put under, right? We are under someone.
Right.
And I think what we spoke the last time, we spoke a little bit about the centurion. The centurion.
Can I read that story?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Matthew 8, 5-10. And we'll just read that for background, and then we can
and I think
on.
I'm going to ask you to read one verse before that, when you start, when it says the centurion Okay, yeah, just read it once.
So
Let me
now
see.
when Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him pleading with him, saying, Lord.
Okay, so right there, if I may interrupt, where it says pleading with him, is that King James?
That's New King James.
Okay, because King James I think says worshipped him, saying.
Okay. Well, he came and he said, now notice what he said, Lord. This is a centurion who would have had authority over the Jews, right?
Yeah.
But he says, Lord, my servant is lying at home, paralyzed, dreadfully tormented. And Jesus said to him, I will come and heal him. The centurion answered and said, Lord, I am not worthy that you should come under my roof, but only speak a word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to this one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes. And to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard it, he marveled and said to those who followed, assuredly, I say to you that I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel.
Sorry. Sorry about my cough.
It's probably that peanut that you were eating.
Well, maybe it is.
Yeah. So, pleading with him, worshipped him, interesting concept.
Yeah.
But definitely saying Lord, placing himself under Jesus.
When you depend, when you are under someone, it's a form of worship. And this is what, when we look at maybe a Sunday, I'm sorry about my throat. It's causing me problems. Sorry about that. I'll just say
I'll
just struggle with it.
Yeah, well, we forgive you there. That's good.
I'll just struggle with it. Good. All right, if you can forgive me for it. If not, then the Bible says some things about people that can't forgive you.
Yeah, we'll have our next one on bitterness, right?
Yeah.
And unforgiveness.
Yeah. Well, the thing about authority is it is a form of worship in a sense, especially when it's to do with spiritual things. Now, as far as are you worshiping someone because you are under someone's authority at work, yada yada? No, not really, but it is.
But it's a
sense
form of
it.
honor.
It's
a form of honor.
It is. And
I think when we think of worship, we're like, I'm praying to you.
Right.
No, but there is an honor that comes. It's expressing their worth.
Yeah. What the centurion said, he noticed that Jesus is doing something that comes from a higher power. You know, the miracles he's doing. What did he ask? He was asking for a miracle. All right, basically. And so in saying that, he was declaring that I do understand you're under authority because what you're doing doesn't come from yourself.
Right.
It comes from somewhere. And then he made that statement. He said that I'm also a man under authority also. And then he looked and he said, if I tell this man, go do it, he will. If I ask him to do it, he will. All right? And he noticed that when Jesus said something, that he will was also acted. In other words, if he healed, he laid hands on people or however he did that, they were healed. They were healed. He's seeing a parallel between those two. And this is where he saw, there is an authority that you are under that I understand. And then he said that I'm also a man under authority if I tell this man, yada, so forth. And then Jesus responded by simply saying, I've not seen anything of a faith like this in all of Israel. He marveled, and he said, and he saw the picture of the whole system of faith. This is how that works. Faith in which he had faith in the Father, obviously. Well, so the Father granted or released that which the Father had because he was in submission to that. So he carried the will of the Father, all right? Jesus carried the will of the Father. That's why he came. So you carry the will of the Father, you will carry the deeds of the Father. It continues on, and it goes on down the line. And to the next person that is under authority of whatever degree, it is passed on to that as well. And you see that whole line. Jesus called that faith.
And interestingly enough, the centurion had a picture, I think probably a fairly well-developed theology in this, because he says, just say the word. Now, who is Jesus going to say the word to? He's basically imagining that he is looking at the next person. Or there's an unseen chain of command going on to heal my servant, right? So he saw this thing, even though he's saying, I tell my soldier this or this servant, but he says, you just say the word. And he understands that there's a spiritual reality that is going on.
Yeah. And that's how faith works. In times where I've seen miraculous things happen, thank you, miraculous things happen, it is always the chain of command from above. And this is where I saw, and I don't know if you want to go here or not, but where Jesus said, I don't do anything that I don't see the Father do. So he saw the Father do something. What does that look like? What did he see the Father do? And now he responded in the same way. And we would conclude that Jesus was highly successful in dealing with demonic issues, healing issues, diseases, and so he was highly, if we want to call it successful, I don't know that we call it successful, but he was highly effective. That where he asked for healing, they were healed, and he healed the sick. He just, I mean, it just goes on and on and on, everything he did. It was his daily life. It was the way it was. And it came because he was under authority. Now, how do we look at that in our day? By us being under authority, does that power work in us as well? Absolutely it does.
And I think there are going to be some people with a situation like was written in about. So I've heard people have this conversation. They've asked me, so if I am under this authority and they're a bad authority, how do I ever operate in the will of God?
Well, okay, so let's look at this. Okay, if you're talking that way, we're talking then the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, all right? And who's next? Father, Son, Holy Spirit, then who's next? As far as authority?
As far as authority, I mean, as far as people and relationships go, well, we understand that as far as headship.
Yeah.
And in a marriage, or where are you talking about?
Well, let's say church, because it looks like that's probably what this was referring to. So we have a little bit of a thing that we have to be careful with, because we are not part of the Godhead. All right, it's the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But then God does look, Jesus, the head of the church.
Sure.
Man is not. Jesus is. And this is where we have to yield ourselves to the will of God in leading forth, in hearing from God and leading forth. But then also the believer also has responsibility in that same relationship. He does not go to the Pope.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? But he has a direct relationship with the Father as well. And so this can get really complicated if you misunderstand this. There's people that would never say anything or do anything in disrespect or disregard to whoever's maybe like a bishop. They would never do that because they would fear, they just have fear that, that this is completely wrong, so they'll just have to do whatever they say. And then there's another side that has this rebellion in them. They would never do anything because it was said they shouldn't, and they will not. We know that one there comes as a lineage of rebellion. The other one is the lineage of love. It's the gifts of the Spirit and so forth. Now, the way I understand this, and there's a picture we need to paint here a little bit, a person that is under the authority of Christ, and I've dealt with this over and over, and I don't know that I'm free from it, but I would say that for the most part, as far as I know, and if I'm made aware of that I'm not free from it, I will change, and that is biases. I cannot have a bias being under the Father. My bias should all come from Him. I don't have a personal bias. I can have some preferences, but I'm not necessarily putting myself under the authority of that, even opinion-based. My opinion does not count much. The Father doesn't have an opinion. Jesus didn't have an opinion. He never had an opinion because He is the truth. He is the truth. So a truth does not need opinion. So one thing that we have to be very careful, and I'll say like this, that people that God gives authority to, you know some people have more authority than others. A lot of that has been called out of their lives. God has dealt with them, and those things have been taken out of their lives, the personal biases and opinions and certain, and when you are under the authority of Christ, you simply can't have that. You just can't. If you do, it should be recognized that now, like Apostle Paul did, he said, now, I don't know that I'm necessarily hearing from God on this one, but I do know that I've been around a while, basically, and I do think that this is the right suggestion. But he made it visible so you could see this is not a direct word from God. And I think in that we need to be very clear in. A person that is under authority, you will hear that come out of them a lot, because they understand and recognize that they cannot be of a personal opinion, walking in the will of God, having their own things. And when you're talking about leadership that is abusive or so, that's what you get.
Right. And Jesus talked and kind of said this to his disciples when they were trying to figure out who was going to be the greatest. They're kind of figuring out which one's closest to the seat of authority. Right. And he said to them in Matthew 20:25, Jesus called them to himself, and he said, you know, the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. Yeah. And those who are great exercise authority over them. And so it's almost like they force them to do things. And they said, but with you, it's not to be that way. I think there are many times when positions can create opinions, positions of authority, and it says, well, I think that I should be able to tell you to do this. It's not necessarily a thus saith the Lord, but it feels to me in this position I should be able to do that. Is that abusive?
Can be, most definitely, yeah. One thing that you will never hear from a person that is under authority is that I have authority, but it's visible. The person that is under authority doesn't need to make it known. It's visible. You have to state your position. Well, I'm in this position, I will not. No. When you have that position, you don't need to tell everyone. They recognize that. And that's what they recognized with Jesus. He was a man under authority. He never spoke about it, but they recognized, what's with this man? When he speaks, things happen. And that's the difference. I know that years ago, I was deeply convicted because I felt I have so many words, especially in preaching. I have so many words and so much work that goes into, and so little happens. And it's like, and I saw the thing of authority. And in this picture, I had to lay down a lot of biases and things that I culturally was ingrained in me and religiously was ingrained in me, that the Father did not necessarily teach me. It's not really in the Bible, but it was a preference of mine. And I had to lay that down. And that's where I walk. I truly try to walk in that submission all the time. And if I do have an opinion or an idea or something that is not according to what I have received of the Father or what I read in the Bible, I don't go and take one verse and twist it and make it fit my thing that I would like to make. If I do that, I will certainly state, now this is a verse that could apply to this, But what I see a lot of this abusive authority, it's actually not a authority that comes from the Father, but it has a bit of rebellion. And one of those things is private interpretation of the Bible. That's private interpretation of the Bible if you have your own interpretation just to make a certain point that you would like to really bring out, and you will drive that point home to make this so that you can have your opinion and people form to that, you will not have authority. Try casting out devils if you think you have authority. They don't even believe. A lot of those people don't even believe there is anything like that. But try dealing with the powers of darkness. They won't budge. They won't move. They won't do anything. Why? because you're not under authority. And they know it. They see that. When you are under authority, truly under authority in the will of God, all right, in the will of God. So when you're in the will of God, you are not in your own will. If you have your own will, you don't have the Father's will. If you have the Father's will, you don't have your own will. And walking that way, you have authority. And this is why those devils said, I know Paul and I know Jesus, but who are you? Mm-hmm. You're trying to tell us we are to do something? We don't even know who you are. We don't see any authority structure in your life. And they were powerless. This is really, really important. When I saw the need of deliverance in people's lives, God led me to understanding authority. That's what I had to understand first. Mm-hmm. That you can yell at demons, you can do all this, and you can proclaim, you can do anything. But if you're not under authority, you might make a lot of racket, but nothing happens.
And I think one of the things that weakens churches in our day and weakens even our walk with God is that there's a lot of rebellion that people aren't even aware of. They've gotten so used to walking with rebellion. Nobody's going to tell me what to do.
Yeah.
This isn't going to happen. Yeah. And when you do that, you are already setting yourself up as God in a sense. And you say, well, right. I'm never going to, and some people it starts as teenagers or even, grade school where that teacher's not going to tell me what to do, where you subconsciously start rebelling against a lot of other things. People do it with parents, and then they come out and they have a hard time relating well to authority anywhere else. Jesus, when he came and spoke to his disciples, and we talked about this at the end of our talk last week. Mm-hmm. Jesus came and he said to them, all authority has been given to me in heaven and in earth. Yeah. And this was after he was resurrected. But there was an interesting thing that he said then in Luke 10. This is before he died, but he was sending out the 70. Mm-hmm. And he said, behold, I give you, Luke 10:19, he says, behold, I give you the authority to trample on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy. Yeah. Now, that's an interesting statement that Jesus gave. And when he sent
what was the word he used?
He says, I give you the authority. See? I give, yeah.
Notice he gave, what did he give? Authority. Mm-hmm. Notice that's what is needed to deal with these oppressive spirits, authority. He doesn't say, I give you the power to go. Now, there is some word power in there somewhere, but he gave him authority. So in other words, it was authorized under him. Mm-hmm. He sent authorization out, and they yielded themselves to that authority or authorization and used it. And today, we argue that it's not for us today. It's not, this is not for our day. It's not. And did I bring that out last time? I think I brought that out because in this conversation here, it does appear that he sent them out, all right? And we read an account where one of them, they found somebody that was out there casting out demons and devils, all right? And the disciples said, no, you don't do this.
Because he wasn't one of us.
Yeah, he was one of us. Yeah, so he don't. And then what did Jesus say? Did I say that last time? Because I
don't know if you brought that up. But
okay, this is really important. Look at this. Actually, can you find that verse? It would really be good.
Well, let's see. Because maybe our text can do that. Let me see if I can find it here as well.
The Lord showed me this just a while back, and I thought, where have I been all these years when I would have needed that verse? Because I was confronted by so many people that opposed me in these things and said there is nothing like demons, and miracles are not for today. And this man was casting out devils and doing miracles and things like this, and the disciples ran into him. Mm-hmm. And then Jesus' response says, you can't speak lightly of me.
So Luke 11:23. Let me see. No, that's maybe not the one because it said, he that is not with me is against
close.
us. So it's the wrong one here. Let me just see here.
It's close. You're almost on that subject. This is really important to get this because it solves the question, for some people that are highly technical and saying that, well, yeah, but we're not part of the 70. Or when he gave the disciples power to do that, we're not disciples. So therefore, it was only for the disciples. You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the question is, who was this man that was not a disciple? He was doing this, and Jesus said, let him go. You see what I'm saying? And
okay, so here I think here's one. He says, Jesus, this is in Mark 9:39, Jesus said, forbid him not, for there is no man which shall do a miracle in my name that can lightly speak evil.
Right.
Me.
What was he doing before? Where does it say?
Well,
He said, we found a man that was...
Yes, John answered him saying, Master, this is Mark 9:38. John answered him saying, Master, we saw one casting out devils in thy name, and he followeth not us, and we forbade him because he followeth not with us.
Right. And then Jesus said,
forbid him not, for there is no man that shall do a miracle in my name that can lightly speak evil of me.
So he was doing this, but was not a disciple.
Not that they knew of.
Right. But that is an argument that a lot of people have. That was for back then, because they were disciples. Here's one that wasn't. Jesus said, don't stop him. He must be on the right track, or it wouldn't work for him.
Mm-hmm.
You see, I know there is a verse, and I'm coming into. Maybe I should just drop this next verse that I was about to say. But the Bible,
which one is it?
Well, the Bible talks about. My son talked about this to me. He said years ago. He said the Lord showed him that follow those that follow them that have received the promises. That, in other words, follow people that have received the promises of God. Be followers of those people. And there's a lot of people that are following people that don't even believe in promises. Why not start exemplifying and seeking? And when we're looking at this verse, and we're looking at what point are we no more under certain authorities because of struggles and problems, that basically they deal with you, or here it says didn't have that person's best interest. No, it should never be that person's best interest, because it's God's best interest. All right, because that's how the authority works. But my thinking is that if you want to follow someone and you sense the need of being a follower of a movement or follower of a
are you talking
church,
about 2 Timothy 2:22.
Let's find out.
Flee also youthful lust, but follow righteousness, faith, charity, and peace with them that call on the Lord out of a pure heart. Not that one. Hebrews 6? All right.
I'm putting you on a spot here, but these are thoughts that come as I'm speaking here, and I left my iPad at home.
Hebrews 6, verse 12. Here we go.
Yeah. Follow them.
Yes, that ye be not slothful, but followers of them who through faith and patience inherit the promises.
Yeah. If you want to be a follower of somebody in a church or so, take a look at that. That's what I did with the Wilkersons, the Derek Prince, and David Wilkerson, Leonard Ravenhill, and Derek Prince. I saw them that they are people that the gospel works for them. It's like they preach, things move. And I saw that the promises work for them. They believe in faith. And so I became a follower of them. And as a result of that, it has affected my life quite tremendously. And if you are part of a system or something where the authority of God has not been transferred because of lack of submission to whoever, if a lot of, and I'm sorry to say this way, but a lot of churches, there's very little thought given in the walking in the will of God. Mm-hmm. But I have my thing that I want to promote, and this is what I believe, and you look at these churches that everything is hinged on whether the bishop says yes or no on a subject. That's the bishop that's doing that. And I have this little thing once in a while that you see some of these churches are rather strict, And my wife and I have kind of this thing back and forth that we see somebody change something, say, oh, God must have changed his mind. No, I personally would consider that quite dangerous for me to be under such a person when you know they're not walking in the will of God, and they're not even concerned about the will of God, but to uphold a culture or a personal bias, that to me would, in my thoughts, would to leave a place like that in peace. Go somewhere where you have those examples of those through faith have inherited promises.
You wouldn't be shaking the dust off your feet. You'd just leaving in peace.
Leave in peace. As much as lies in you, live peaceably with all men, Bible says. And there's a time maybe for people to put up some resistance at times when someone is really on the wrong path, but not resistance by way of rebellion, but simply by contradiction. This is what the Bible says, but you say this, and I cannot see how you can justify that, and a little challenge like that out of love is okay, but not in any kind of rebellion. But yeah, I wouldn't hang around. I just would not hang around places like that unless God instructs me deliberately that I've called you to walk here in this den of lions, or in the lion's den, or in Ezekiel. I mean, they were also in captivity, and when the children of Israel were in captivity, the prophets were there too. They did not leave. And so I think something like this is where you are under, if the ministry or if the preachers or if the whatever the situation are not under the will of God, but promoting their own thing, this is where you have to come into the presence of God and simply ask, God, what should I do here? Do I continue on? And if God instructs you that this is the place I've called you to walk, and it's not based on my opinion, it's based on what God says, then you should stay there. But if God says, and you see the conviction, I cannot continue like this, then it's when you should, in a peaceful way, just go somewhere else. I really believe that.
And I think there's something to be said for that too. I mean, as you think about, can I stay here or can I not? Is this where God has called me to be? There are times where God asks us to be in places that are very much. I mean, you look at Jesus, his example of being under authority, and yet when Pilate says, you mean you're not going to answer me? Yeah. Don't you know I have the power to kill you or to keep you alive? And Jesus says, you'd have no authority over me unless it was given to you from above. And so even in that, I've looked at that response of Jesus to earthly authorities where he even says, you see what the scribes and Pharisees say, do what they say, but don't do as they do. And he was basically saying they sit, in Moses' seat. But understand, respect the seat, but don't copy their ways. And I think Jesus was teaching some very important things about authority in the way he exemplified even how he interacted with the dominions, if you will, that were on earth. He was very respectful of those.
I think if I would just say this, that if you want some kind of a gauge to know where you're at in life, am I under proper authority? Am I walking under authority, whether it's God or so, is look at what comes out of you. Are there miracles? These signs shall follow them that believe. Is there a positive flow from heaven that comes out of your life and affects other people? Is the flow restricted, or does it flow forth? Or is there nothing like that? There's something to look at. It really is, because there's a lot of people. I could turn to so many stories, but I'm sure some of these people that are also watching, that they would know I'm relating their story. I could have a new one that I just ran across, an experience that would be nice if I could share it, but I can't. But to be under proper authority means that you have a certain amount of authority yourself. And if you lack that authority, then it's obvious that somewhere you've not placed yourself under correct authority. It's the way it is. I also think if we talk about this. When you talk about husband-wife things, I think you run into situations where the husband is not taking his role, and now the wife finds it very difficult to know where to operate. And okay, so the husband not taking the role, now the wife doesn't know her role, and often goes back and tries to be what the husband should be. Can be the case, and if you look at the connections down through, you'll see it in the children. That's just the way it is. It always is. It's just that authority structure just moves that way, and you'll see something go wrong in those children. Now, you can have a man being in his place and a woman being out of her place, and you'll see the same thing. And I understand there is something to every individual has to make a decision to serve God. But there is a certain power and authority in this structural system that God has ordained, that the husband is the head. Yeah. And if we want God's results, we have to basically go back to exactly the way he's designed it and walk in those places. But I run into this quite often, have many times run into this where a husband was out of his place by being way over strict or demanding or unloving and unkind and all that. And now where does the woman come into this picture? What do I do? Do I continue to stay in an abusive relationship like this? It brings many of those questions up to where you wonder sometimes, what is the right thing to do? But this, again, is where you go back, and even the woman in that case, or it can be a man, you have to look and discern yourself whether you're in the will of God. Sometimes it would be my escape, my exit to just up and run, but is that the will of God? If I can say it this way, people, we are always subject to the will of God. Never your own will. If we're in our own will, we're not in the will of God.
Right, and we're in rebellion, and that's a bad place to be.
And that rebellion shifts right on down. So it's really something to monitor in our own life, to understand what power, what authority works by way of the evidence that we see. It's really important.
And the character that comes out of our life. The character is so important as well.
And we never talked about justice much, but it's one thing I would have liked to. But in this word justice is where we could bring this up about bias and opinion. Justice does not have an opinion.
No, like you said, it's truth. And Jesus said, for this reason I came into this world, was to bear witness to the truth. And I am the way, the truth, and the life. And there's no opinion in that. This is the truth. And
I was blessed many years ago when I was going through a real deep time in my life, like I often have. See, I have allowed God, when I gave God my life, when I gave him my life completely, I gave him everything. And I said, you can do whatever you want to with me. You can make anything out of me that you choose. And I will not argue it, but I give my life as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto you, which is just a reasonable service of mine. And if you need to work things over, however, I will just always be in your will. I was so moved, or I'll try to always surrender in your will. I was so moved where I saw that Jesus delighted to do the will of the Father, and look what it cost him. It cost him everything, but he delighted to do the will of the Father. And it's like, if he delighted to do the will of the Father, he was saying, I'm delighted to do this for you, Father, to be persecuted, and for him to even die on the cross. He was delighted to do that. So the costs that he had endured meant really nothing to him, because he delighted to do the will of the Father. And I remember when I went on my face, I can pretty much tell you the spot where God dealt with me and said that he kind of like requested, will you give your life to me in that same depth, to where I can do whatever I choose to with you, and whether it's sorrow, whether it's whatever. And I said, I will delight to do your will, O Father. And I said that. And you can say, I delight, but the only way you can delight is if you're in total submission to him.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you have nothing anymore. You give him everything, and you lay everything down. You hold on to nothing. And
that delight happens when you trust fully in him too.
Yeah.
It's that relationship.
You just know that if everything goes wrong, God is there. If everything goes right, God is there, and I will just live with it. And in this there's tests that he brings our way at times to see are you there yet? Are you still that way? And there's times when we long to maybe have something different. And I did for years. At times, is will I never be accepted? Will I always be rejected by man? Will I always? Well, this is what Jesus did. He was rejected all the way down to the end, and he delighted to do the will of God. So I might as well be happy. I might as well not allow it to take me down, because it's actually a work of the Father. It's actually a purpose of why he has me here, and I'm not Jesus, but I'm under him.
And our light afflictions, our temporary afflictions, are working for us a more eternal weight of glory.
That's what they say.
That's what they say. That's what Paul says, and I think
Paul
about
says
that.
Yeah.
As we wrap this up, I think this topic of authority could go for quite some time in a way. There's so many different directions to go. I pray that as we talked about this and as you shared from your experience, some of the questions maybe are cleared up. But there's so much with authority. But I think it really, how I respond to that is going to begin with me in coming under first of all, the authority of God.
Yeah.
Having that relationship with God through Jesus Christ. Surrendering my will, and then being filled with the Spirit, and in submission to where he leads us. I mean, the Spirit took Jesus into the wilderness to be tempted, and brought him back again in power, and
brought him out of it.
And I think that,
but then he was led by the Spirit,
right? And I believe that for all of us, there is a degree of that journey, and we need to understand that sometimes, even this thing that we rebel against, or this situation or whatever, is we have to check. And has the Spirit led me into this, or have I wandered away and gotten there myself?
And we do at times, but we have to also remember a little bit like son Matt said on Sunday, that it's not just by being saved and now I'm going to heaven and all that. There's inheritance. There's a whole picture that's much bigger than that. And that includes whether we do some things that it might not be in God's will, but yet the whole picture is we are in the will of God. You see what I'm saying? There's times when we walk maybe, and I kind of look at it this way, if a camera brings this to me, but God shows me that where I really want you is over there. And where I walk here is sometimes we know that's where he's trying to direct us. But we walk into this wall, and we can't go on, so we walk into this wall, and we again hit that wall, and we keep on walking. We never stop, because if you stop, God can't direct your path. Feet have to move to change directions. And so we go into this, and finally we hit that. That's how life is. So there's times when it seems that
it's rarely
you've misstepped.
It's rarely a straight shot to that.
Yeah, exactly. There's times where it seems that we make missteps, and there's times that we do make missteps because we're human. But my will is submitted to the will of God. There's times when maybe there's some light things but my entire life, Father, you know, I delight to give you my life, and I delight to do your will. Okay, so does that mean that if I go up here to the red light in Sugar Creek on my way home or something, and the light turns yellow, and what should I do? Stop or really go quick? Do it. What's the will of God? It doesn't work that way. He also gives us natural options and good thinking. He in that package of doing the will of God, he gives us sound minds, and he allows us to make decisions. He is not there to guide no, but it's a little bit like I say that I, as a leader in my life, many leaders think they have to be ahead. They have to lead from the head and tell everyone, come this way, come this way. I think that is a weak leader, if you want to call it that way. I think the stronger way, or the spiritual way of leadership is you can walk behind. You just have to have a voice. Let the sheep hear the voice. They'll move at the voice. You don't have to be up ahead. You don't have to push that way. No. I'm not concerned that I am the one in front and everyone's following. That has never been a concern of mine. My concern is that they're going the right direction. And if I can be in the back here somewhere and just say a couple words, it'll guide them. I saw that with a sheep over in Israel. That was a tremendous lesson. I don't know, are we getting over time?
We're well over time, yes. So
I'll just leave it.
Well, maybe that'll be a topic for another time. But, this has been good. And I think as we end this tonight, just the encouragement that as we look at Christ and our position in him, all authority has been given to him in heaven and in earth. And coming under him, we can then go and be representatives of him. So may God bless you tonight. Thank you for joining us. And as you interact with authority, may God lead you.
Amen.
Amen. God bless you. Have a good night.